Well, we got a pretty crappy camera going there, don't we? If we can't get that fixed.
Is it actually going away from it? Were you the last time at the
park? Not this far. Are we getting some audio out?
Yeah, you got me.
I got you. Okay. And that camera doesn't work, so we're going back to this one.
Actually, you had me the first time, so.
Bear with us, guys. We're trying to get set up. We're having some internet issues out here.
It's a really nice forearm.
Oh, I tell you what. We may not be able to get my production skills a little better. And it says it doesn't like the camera rotation.
You got a really good shot of. Oh, it's actually okay. There's just about a 7-second lag.
What do you think?
Well, that's the picture.
Is that the picture that we're going to get?
It's not the greatest. It's kind of spotty, but.
All right. Hilarious. The modern technological issues we go through. All right, is everybody hearing us? Not seeing any response online. Anybody hearing us out there? It says we have 18 people, but nobody's saying they hear us.
I think they just now got the question.
I know we got a bit of a lag. All right, somebody can hear us.
There we go.
Loud and clear, there we go.
Just 8 seconds behind.
Just 8 seconds behind, right. So, this is Lawrence live with Andrew. Andrew, former law enforcement officer. Andrew actually reached out to me several months ago when the May 5th incident became prominent because of the transport
Having to do with EMS.
having to do with EMS. You may need to speak up just a little bit to get it out there. You guys will have to let us know how we're going, whether you're hearing both of us or just me, because I'm a loudmouth. But I guess the best place to start is tell us about when you reached out to me and what you thought about that and why you reached out to me.
Well, part of it has to do with the libertarian background, the whole distrust of government in general, but I know you were specifically focused on law enforcement and law enforcement conduct, but one of the things that spoke so clearly to me, EMS being passive in the police abuse, was following right in board with it, with their violations of protocol and their illegal transport.
Well, when I finally got to the end of that, I found out that the way they exonerated that was they talked about the individual requested to be transported that way. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you heard it straight from the Board of EMS when we talked to them that no patient should be transported. Said no patient would be transported in that position. So, I mean, all the science says not to do it. Their own protocol said not to do it. They can make up whatever they want, but
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any way to justify inappropriate behavior.
Yep. And so you've been former EMS, former law enforcement.
Correct. In
So-
Kansas.
It's kind of funny when I talked to Kevin Joels and went up there and told him that I talked to somebody that was former law enforcement. He immediately interrupted me and said, "Well, that's not what he told me." So what exactly did you tell Joels that made him think I was lying to him?
Well, when I contacted Joel's, it was from my information was from my previous EMS background in the state of Kansas, and that's all the more he needed. There was no reason to tell him that I was prior law enforcement. It just wasn't pertinent to the situation. But I did think it was funny how he was so quick to jump on the lack of knowledge he had. And
you think it was just a way to stop me or a way to shut me down?
Oh yeah, yeah.
A way to contradict.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
He thought he had more information than what you did, and he was going to one-up you with it. And, well, it didn't work out in his favor.
Did you ever get anywhere with your FOIA requests? I know that you went up against the city attorney for a while trying to find out some information on that, and they just kept denying?
No, I haven't received anything yet.
Okay. And then one of the things that I wanted to talk about the other night, guys, I sat and I talked to Andrew for about 2.5 hours, and the stories that he told me, my goodness, and the promo that I did probably doesn't do this justice, because a lot of people are seeing Andrew as a guy that was out there just taking away people's rights. But I think it's a little different than that. And I think what a lot of people need to understand is the reason that he's not a law enforcement officer anymore. And I'm going to let him go ahead and talk about that.
Well, the one thing that jumps out at me is, and like I said, I don't even remember this document from the days of KLETC. But when I went up and requested the records, and I received this law enforcement code of ethics that apparently I swore to and signed on the first day of the academy. There's no way, in my opinion, that you can be a law enforcement officer at an age, having sworn to this, and still do anything in that profession. It's just not possible. You're not there to protect and to serve. You're there to harass and collect. And that's completely thrown in the face of whatever this document is. I mean,
but you're talking about harass and protect, and I know I've heard you talking about the traffic stops and stuff that you've done. Some people are going to say that controlling traffic is a part of the responsibility of the police officer, and that's not harassing and protecting, that's training people to drive right. And that if you didn't want to get the ticket, you shouldn't break the law.
I would argue that the training should have probably been done in driver's education, not at the tip of the gun by an armed man on the side of the road creating an emergency situation. So, I mean, there's two sides to look at it.
Well, and that's the argument when you're looking at you as a libertarian, which is
correct.
What you are as a libertarian. You're completely hands-off government.
Well, the smallest government we can get away with, whether that's none or extremely small, but yes.
Well, what is extremely small to you may not be extremely small to somebody else.
Correct.
We were talking earlier about the difference between libertarians that are out in western Kansas and libertarians that are around here in Lawrence. Yep. And somebody, actually Justin last week when I was talking to him, compared the libertarians here in Lawrence that they might as well just be Democrats with their viewpoints. And it does kind of ride that way, because some of the libertarians that we run into, they want hands-off government on all the things that matter to them, but they want other people to be regulated and not. To me, it seems like they want the rules to apply to other people, but not necessarily themselves sometimes.
In my day-to-day life, having been former law enforcement, having done EMS, having been a private business owner, we're overregulated. Everything is overregulated. I come from an era of EMS where the majority of Kansas EMS professionals 10 years ago were private volunteers who felt the need to give back to the community. Those people had an aspiration to seek out additional training on their own time so that then they could, once they had certification, provide their neighbors that level of care. Through government regulation, through federal government regulation, you now have so much training, it's no longer possible to get it at a volunteer level. And you have to join the system, and every aspect of our lives is overregulated, in my opinion. Less regulation, better service; more regulation, less service.
Okay. So now, when you say less regulation, better service, how's that equate?
Let's say you've got, what would you rather have working for you? A group of 30 dedicated individuals who were motivated on their own accord to seek you out because they want to give back to the community, or trying to fill 30 positions with people that just need a paycheck and, okay, yeah, I'll go do the bare minimum to get a certification, as long as I get the paycheck coming in. As a, not as a business owner, but as an employer, which would you rather have working for you?
Well, ideally, you'd want the people that want to be there, but now my question is going to become, do we just put the people that want to be EMS out there and call them EMS without the right kind of training to be EMS?
That's what we did for the last 50 years and worked out pretty good. You know, it's not that they had no training. They sought out, they ever got on the ambulance or provided provided that care. But what we've seen is a drastic change in the way things are offered, and it's all through the regulation of the government. The government decided it's better to hold everybody to this standard, even though well, we were talking about Roe v. Wade and our differences on that. You see that as taking a choice. The way I see is, well, now instead of one decision, now we're going to end up with 50. 50, you get freedom, you get more choices to be had. EMS would have been done the same. You had 50 different states that had 50 different certification levels. Each one is in charge of their own training. They set the bar for what you need to meet in order to provide the service. Once the federal government gets involved, you're not going to bring the lesser up to par. So what do? You just like No Child Left Behind, you bring those who have higher standards down, and that's what everybody's going to meet. That's the service everybody's going to get. So.
See, I don't know that I can necessarily follow all that, because to me, there's got to be some kind of a standard, especially for an EMS. Now, law enforcement...
Well, and there were just 50 different ones. Each state had the standard that they had for their own state.
But in this day and age, is it acceptable to go with 50 different standards?
You're really going to give me in this day and age?
Come on. Yes, I am going to give you in this day and age, because you gave that in this day and age to somebody alongside the road one day, I'm sure. But no, but really, do we want 50 different ideas of what EMS service should be, or should we not have a national standard? So case in point,
when you had, prior to the new regulations going into effect, Kansas had one of the highest to obtain paramedic certifications out of all 50 states. You were going to have cardiac issues, if you were going to have trauma issues, whatever it was, you, statistically speaking, were going to get the greatest care in the state of Kansas. You go next door to Missouri or Nebraska or one of these states, those levels were a lot easier to obtain, equaling a lot less service. So when this happened, Kansas was one of the states that it became easier to obtain that certification. Along with that ease meant you're sacrificing somewhere. So as a Kansan, you want better EMS or lesser qualities? Because that's what we got. The other thing you need to look at is the privatization of it through AMR. Is Lawrence AMR? No, well, of course.
No, Lawrence is Douglas County Fire Medical.
But if you look at Johnson County is AMR.
Well, is Johnson County AMR? I have no knowledge about that.
Positive.
And that's American Medical Response, is that what they're called?
And look up their Google reviews.
Are they pretty bad?
Oh, yeah. Let's just say it looks like you left a review for them.
So AMR. So I want to go back to law enforcement, though. You know, some of the better stories that you've had is about being unsure about yourself on law enforcement and how that was handled. And, you know, we hit on, in the promo I put in there about being able to be sworn in and put on the roads and out there actually enforcing laws without actually being trained.
Oh yeah, no training of any kind. And actually in the state of Kansas, which to my knowledge is still done the exact same way. At the time that I was sworn in 2006, they actually wanted the law enforcement officer to get the on-the-job training for up to 6 months prior to going to the academy. It was a requirement at that time. They wanted to make sure that you were going to work out and not waste the city's time or the law enforcement training center's time. What that equals to, if you're not in a department that has a professional education system such as Lawrence, and I'm sure it's even happened at Lawrence at some point, but you wind up with somebody who gets sworn in with no training of any kind and, well, go out and practice stopping people. You know,
is it just
based
that simple?
What it was for me.
Do you think it's that way here in Lawrence, in the bigger cities?
No. In Lawrence, I'm sure it's not. Because specifically in Lawrence, in Utah, you're going to have a on-the-job training person who's going to ride with you, who's going to be follow me, watch what I do. Yeah, they're going to learn from they're going to have a counselor right there with them. In the small towns, yeah, that's exactly what you get.
Well, I've seen in Lawrence that it looks like they have about 2 hiring phases, it seems like.
Sounds about
and
right.
That's what you were talking about the KLETC. They do two classes a year. And It's just tough thinking that there's cops out there that haven't been trained, that are just given a badge and a gun and told to go out and patrol the roads.
And you read the law.
But is that more in the rural areas, right? It's just in the rural areas that we're seeing that majority, or does that happen in the city? Does it happen in the city?
It's primarily going to be in the rural setting, but I have to ask you this. As soon as you leave Lawrence, where are you at?
Well, you're in the rural area.
You're in rural Kansas. I mean, if you go from here to Topeka, how many rural areas do you pass through?
Well, you don't pass through. I mean, that's not a good comparison because there's really not any local patrols between here and Topeka other than Lawrence, Douglas County, and Shawnee County and Topeka. But I understand what you're saying.
Well,
if you go south of here, you're going to go down and you're going to run into Ottawa.
You've got native police in between there. You do have a few locations up there. They've got tribal police.
Well, that's going to be mostly north Topeka. But I get what you're saying is that
as soon as you leave the big city, there's a stark contrast, and that's the point. The majority of Kansas is going to be that smaller department, that smaller agency. And they did try to fill the gap. I mean, there's been lots of federal funding that's gone into it, which, once again, in my libertarian mindset, is not a good thing. But that's one reason that all the cops dress the same way, talk the same way, do the same thing, charge the same thing, is from that one federal entity that's controlling it.
Yeah. You know, I noticed I was pulling down some stock footage the other day, and I pulled down some footage of an Israeli officer in his gear. And did you know that the Lawrence police officers just about had that much gear?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. One of the big pushes back when I was an officer back in 2006, you had this big change because after 9/11 occurred, the federal government opened up federal funds as well as the military equipment.
Right.
And so it was during that time frame that all this equipment, the MRAPs were being brought into the communities, the long guns were being switched out. Now, instead of one rifle for an agency, now every car is got your automatic rifle.
Right.
And we became, instead of a policing agency, we became.
Because of surplus, or was
Mindset change that went along with that. That's where you started seeing people bringing in the reflective glass we talked about. You went from a Class A uniform like Andy Griffith would have to your BDUs and your vest, with your tactical vest with all of your ammo hanging off of it. So yeah, along with that came a mindset.
Well, tell us about going to KLETC.
Which part?
Start wherever you like. I mean, you got hired at a local agency and then was sent there for training after several months.
After 6 months of being on the road, I was sponsored to go to KLETC. After doing the testing, I was accepted. I was part of the 188th class. That was in the fall of 2006. I'm starting to see from these records, I signed a lot of paperwork that at the time I didn't remember, one of which was the Officer Code 6. But you've seen the training schedule that we went through. I don't know if you had any questions on that.
Well, I mean, the one morning of constitutional law was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I wish I could remember that too. You had constitutional law wasn't so much, here's the Constitution, this is what it means. Constitutional law was an outline of what the Constitution is, what it means to the citizen, and how you can subvert that and use it to get cooperation from a suspect as opposed to actually going through the lawful way. So I don't think when you see constitutional law, it's constitutional law that's actually being taught in the academy.
So, okay, well, when I see constitutional law on something that says they're training police officers, I'm thinking, okay, those police officers are being trained on what constitutional law means and how it should be interpreted and this and that.
And to some degree, but not in the naive sense you're thinking. It's this is what it means to us, and this is how to subvert their rights and not get a lawsuit while doing it.
You're taught how to subvert rights?
Specifically in the interrogation class, how can you talk them into consensually giving the information as opposed to lawyering up, yes.
So you taught the manipulation that we see out here?
Correct.
That's school. It's
Correct.
Not something that they just,
and this, you got to understand, this is just the basic training. It's fully expected once you do the baseline initial you're going to continue to seek out further education and get that, whether it's in interrogation techniques or investigation techniques or whatever the training is. And it goes far more into depth, all the way up to where you were talking about the Israeli, where you can get the Israeli training and use tactics on American city streets. So.
Well, and I'm getting a call in the middle of the live. Dennis, you're live with Lawrence Accountability.
Well, hey, what's going on, Lawrence Accountability?
Oh,
Do I need to call you back?
well, probably, unless you want to be live with Lawrence Accountability.
So, have a great day.
I didn't know if maybe he had a question. But, so, this is the problem that I've been identifying quite a bit, is that the officers aren't trained what the laws are. So you're telling me they're trained how to get around the laws, not actually how to abide by them.
They're trained as far as what the laws are and how they need to deal with them. But you got to understand, the training that they're receiving on the laws, it's little to no training on the Constitution. So, and when it comes down to the laws, the basic information that's going through their training is the day-to-day laws that they're going to encounter and what they're going to deal with. It'd be like anybody in any profession. You've got the regular stuff you deal with on a regular basis. You know how your report needs to be written. You know how a person needs to be handled, whether it's citation, it's arrest, what's going to happen. When you start getting into the laws, I mean, we've got, what, 22,000 gun laws in this country on the books is just pertaining to guns. So no officer is going to be proficient in everything. But when it comes down to the lack of education, we'll call it, for the first 6 months of an officer's training, unless he's in a big city, well, even including the highway patrol, you're not going to get that education. That education is going to be basically the school of knowledge, just like you would at any job. You're going to get baptism by fire, if you will.
And when you say the regular stuff that you're going to deal with every day, reports, and you talk about just
Your
simple
reports,
speeding
showing-
citations, things like that.
Showing up to a domestic battery, showing up to a battery, showing up to, a theft at a store, stuff along those lines, an officer's likely to incur on a regular basis. I mean, most officers aren't going to deal with a felonious vehicle theft on a regular basis. So when you're dealing with something a little more important, you're going to take your time, you're going to contact the county attorney's office, you're going to make sure your ducks are in a row. I wouldn't expect them to know all the ins and outs of every law, but the lack of training is a big issue when it comes down to it.
Well, and okay, let's grab the thing you showed me earlier, that not the training, but the oh my goodness, you had a piece of paper in there that talked about your skills when you were being trained, and you got a minimal grade because you didn't use enough force.
There you go, discretionary use of force.
Yeah, and see, I was looking at this, and Andrew was kind enough to bring his training records with us so that we could kind of get an insight into that as well. And one of the things that I found here, and this is the scenario that they were training on, a daylight burglary, and they give feedback, and the ratings are 1 is unacceptable, 3 is minimum acceptable, and 5 is excellent, or you have a mastery of it. Andrew was rated at a 3 because he responded with a level of force that was lower than what was appropriate. I want to let that sink in, because he's being rated down because he didn't use, or he didn't respond to a higher level of force. And I'm assuming that the lower level of force that you employed was able to successfully defuse the situation.
It did.
But you were penalized for not bringing that higher level of force.
Correct.
Why?
In this instance here, a gun was produced by a suspect after how to respond. I had an unruly subject. You got to understand, these are all, at that time they had a screen in front of you. They would play a video clip and then pause it. Okay, now what are you going to do? And then depending on what choice you made, they would play the next video clip A or video clip B, and that's how they controlled the scenario. So I had a subject who wasn't verbally compliant to my commands, was having none of that. I pulled out my asp, and after I made my choice, the guy pulled out a gun. Now, it turns out I was able to disarm him with the asp, but yeah, I was deemed on that because I didn't pull a gun and shoot. But there was no gun at the time that I made the decision. So.
Okay. So you didn't see a gun.
There was a gun visible. Yeah.
There wasn't a gun. A response to a non-visible
to the current
gun.
situation, which had no gun in it, and then once my choice was made, now appeared the gun, and what do you do?
And so, do you think they were trying to teach you that? What? I mean, what's the lesson here by downgrading on that?
I can speculate, but I would say that training probably fits in with all the training, including the active shooter trainings, where they teach you that it's you or them. You need to be quick to fire first because you're the one who needs to go home. The training wasn't, you need to err on the side of their rights. The training wasn't this document here where you're going to protect and serve the public. The training was, that's the public and they're out to get you. So you put them down first. So that's the way they taught it.
It's literally taught the way I've been talking about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and not just in the basic training course. I mean, this is part of the training that's further on in the additional higher level training. Which, once again, this is where you and I differ, but we can all look back at Uvalde and see how well that training actually does. I guarantee if those officers have had it, which records show that they had the just weeks before that occurred, but you see how wonderfully they followed their training.
It's
We don't have to go political on this. But.
no, I mean, it's not a political issue. We're talking about officers that aren't willing to step up and do the job that they were sworn in to do to protect the citizens, and especially children. And then at the same time we see that, we see the absurdities that get happen on the streets with other people where it didn't need to happen. You know, the force gets used. I wanna laugh a little, man. I wanna laugh a little because these stories that you told about learning how to pull your gun.
Well, that's an important one. I mean, any cop obviously needs to know how to pull his gun. It may have taken me a little while longer than most. You got to understand, when you join a small department, they're going to swear you in, give you a uniform, your badge, all of your equipment, and tell you to put it on. And hopefully you get the basic training. I did not. I mean, I've got a nice little gun. It slides into a nice little holster, and I hear it click. And I did not know what a level 3 retention holster was at that time. It took about 3 weeks to figure out, but I eventually got the gun out of the holster. But yes, that is a lack of training.
But nobody ever asked you to make sure you could pull your gun before you went out on the street?
No, absolutely not.
They didn't think the gun was necessary.
Apparently not back then. Well, see, that was back when we had de-escalation, and that's what you were supposed to use. So.
Well, we don't do de-escalation anymore.
Well, of course not now. That's why you got to make sure you get your gun out of the holster.
And so you called yourself, how did you put this? My life has been one big comical fuck up. And you said that the PD said, well, that's what we're hiring.
Well, that's not the way that went down. But my life has been one giant comical. Where are your notes?
Oh, they're just all over, man. The other night when we were going back and forth.
I think those are two different notes. But, I don't know. I mean, I've done it all. I remember Super Troopers came out in 2002, so that was still a hit about that time. And I remember one particular night where me and a commanding officer went ahead and what was that? They did the Meow game with the Beyond drugs out on Main Street, walking down Main Street. And so we pulled up and just fucked with him for no other reason than to sit there and fuck with him. Just spend 20 minutes, just. It was night shift, bored, nothing better to do. And that's the same guy that ended up writing me up later on because I got behind on writing citations to citizens for not mowing their lawns off
But he sounded like kind of a jerk, rolling up on people in the middle of the night and just fucking with them with the meow game.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that now. I didn't see that then. At the time, he was just a doper. Dopers don't have rights. Dopers aren't real people. I mean, that's the way I was trained. That's the way most of my fellow law enforcement officers believe. So I believe the same thing. I mean, that clearly flies right in the face of this. But like I said, I don't remember this. I just remember the way I was trained by my fellow law enforcement officers.
Going home tonight, regardless of whether everyone else dies. That's right.
I like that. Redneck training day. That's exactly what it was.
It was. And here recently, I heard you ran from the police.
I did. Of course, I didn't know they were police at the time.
And this is the one on your page where you're questioning the highway.
No, that it is up there, but it's not the one where I was questioning the state-sponsored road pirate. That's a different video. But this one here, they had a manhunt going on, and they were looking for a gentleman who stole a vehicle and then fled on foot. And I was driving out in the county, just minding my own business. See a side-by-side coming at me ahead of me. They kind of pulled into a driveway, and I may have known that they wanted to get my tag information. I may not have known that, I don't know, but I did a lawful 3-point turnaround. Look in the rearview mirror, and this thing is blasting up dust and dirt. I mean, they're just flying after me. All right, well, let's see how many ponies this car has. And we went up to the lawful 55 mile an hour, or what Kansas says is reasonable on a dirt road. Approached a intersection. I did hear that they were calling out a chase, but still an unmarked vehicle, and you got to keep in mind this is Podunk, Kansas. Hit the blacktop. I stopped at the stop sign, had the turn signal going. All that's clear in the video. Make my turn onto the blacktop, and this little side-by-side still pursuing me. They're right on my tail. Witness a sheriff's deputy fly by behind me, which I've got the dash cam footage on. I don't know if that's up on the channel or not. I'll have to check. But they wreck out at the intersection I went through, not able to stop on time. Up ahead of me comes a highway patrolman, and he wrecks out, afraid that he was going to come out of the ditch and ran the side of the vehicle. I did pull over at that point. And they got me out at gunpoint, and I said, can I get your reasonable articulable suspicion? You know, what's the reason for this? Oh, you turn around on the road. Okay.
You know, somebody a couple weeks ago made a comment that reasonable articulable suspicion is a myth, that officers do not have to tell you anything about why they're stopping.
They don't, but at the time of the stop, they have to at least have that in their mindset. They don't have to tell you what it is, but at the time they're going to violate your Fourth Amendment right, they have to have that reasonable articulable suspicion so that they went before a judge right here, right now. What is their reasoning, and how are they going to justify it?
So what you're telling me is that a cop can pull up, and he can get you out of the car, doesn't have to tell you what you did, he can search your car, and they can take you to jail. They don't have to tell you anything at all until you go in front of the judge.
The reasonable articulable suspicion standard is if they're going to violate your rights where normally they would need a warrant, they at least have to have enough information that they can get that warrant, or that they are on their way to getting that information.
Well, I want to drill down to the fact of, do they have to tell you what's going on?
No. At least not in the moment.
At what point do you have the right to find out what you've been charged with? Is that just at the court?
That would be a really good question. I mean, it'd be your charging documents.
So what, they book you in when they book you into jail?
They have to swear an
First point, that you have the legal right to find out what you're being held with?
As far as I know. As far as I know, it's never gone to the Supreme Court. I don't think there is an actual set point of the process. But like I said, they have to swear an affidavit to hold you in jail, so that should have that information on it.
But I guess I want to drill down on the fact that, you know, we get pulled over, we don't have a right to find out what we did.
Well, there's no case law so far that at this point they have to say it's for doing this. And I've never been trained that there's a certain point when you have to tell them. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be given a ticket, that information is going to be on the citation. But I don't know that there's actually a set point on it. And maybe that's somebody out on YouTube would know the answer to that. But as far as I know, there's no set point.
So they say a word, take you away, search all your stuff, put you in jail.
Remember what you said about Werner von Braun?
What's that?
I don't know. You said you liked him. He's a Nazi. He's here. This might as well be Nazi Germany.
Well, I didn't say I liked his Nazism.
No, I realize that.
But
No, that's what we run into. That's why you have to have an overseer for this type of force. And that's where the scary part comes in, that you have the one large centralized control, which I think is what all this goes back to, as opposed to local control. One of the big points that you and I have talked about in the past, and I'm starting to see a little bit of this play out in the smaller communities, but what we talked about was residency requirements. When you have police from the community that police the community versus you have police who are from outside the community that come in and police. That worked out for once.
you know, I don't know much about Lawrence's residency requirement if we have one.
Well, you told me that there's several of the people in the administrative position that live outside of Lawrence. In particular, I don't remember what their names were, but you mentioned people who are from Shawnee County that are working here in Lawrence.
Shawnee County working at Lawrence PD?
Well, it's either Lawrence PD or...
Well, we might have people that live out in the county and things like that that work in the areas, but I mean, as far as the PD, I don't have any knowledge about where they individually live.
Okay.
I know that...
I thought we discussed that, and specifically a residency requirement.
Well, I don't know that there's ever been that I've ever discussed a residency requirement. I don't know that there is one. I've never really, I mean, that's an area that I haven't gone into, is trying to figure out where officers' home addresses are.
Well,
But,
and you don't have to know the exact address of them, but I mean, there's something to be said if you're policing your own community
Right.
and your neighbors versus if you're going to a bunch of strangers where you can be as tyrannical as you want, there's not going to be any backlash. And you can be as nasty to them as you want. It's not going to be a problem.
It's just the idea that, well, if we're gonna make a residency requirement, then we're limiting our pool, or we're gonna force them to move here, one or the other.
But you're also causing them to have a little bit of skin in the game, so to speak, because now this is their community. What kind of community do they want to raise their family in, have their kids raised up in? And do they want their kids to be treated the way they're going to be treating other people's college kids?
That'd be a good question to ask some of them.
And I wouldn't be surprised. They may have well, that's something we can actually look up, see if they have a residency requirement. I thought you and I discussed that.
I don't think we ever had it as far as the residency requirements per se. I know that when they hired Lockhart from Missouri, he moved over here, obviously.
But somebody we talked about was coming from, I thought, Shawnee. I can't remember who it was.
We've had
I don't take
officers.
notes like
We've
you.
had officers leave here and go to other departments up there. I think there was. I don't remember where Stephen Wexler went. He left the area, but in any case, whether they all live in Lawrence or in the county, I think most of them are probably pretty local. Yeah, I'm kind of at a loss on that one. Exit to nowhere. We talked about that one, the drug stop.
Oh, yes. I was thinking about that on my way here today.
Because we talk about road pirates, and there is a stop out on I-70 in Kansas, and there's another in Missouri that they do with,
Yep.
and it's just outside of Columbia, Missouri. And these are exits off of the interstate highway that go nowhere. And you'll come over a hill in the middle of the night, and you'll see these flashing blue and red lights. Tell them, Andrew,
The first
you
time
actually
I saw
pulled
it,
over for
well, I
them.
did. It was after my law enforcement career. It was after my MS career, and I was in the process of moving from central Kansas up to Kansas City. And so in the middle of the night is when I'm driving down Interstate 70, and it'd be 2:30 in the morning. I'm driving along, come up over the top of that hill, and I see the red and blue lights. Oh shit! You know, gotta slow down, make sure the seatbelt's on, do everything right. And I drive by, and all it is a barricade in the center median with two strobe lights on.
Mhm.
What the hell is going on here? Okay. Keep driving on to Kansas City and think about it. Oh, okay. This was at the same time that the Kansas Supreme Court was being presented with DUI checkpoints and the constitutionality of DUI checkpoints, how they were able to set those up. And the ruling came out from that, I believe it was right before I pulled off at that intersection, that there had to be an out. And if people did not want to participate, you had to leave them an out. And it wasn't that showed a sign of guilt or anything else. You can pursue them. Couldn't use that against them. So anyhow, the next time it's late at night and I'm along, I see the red and blues. Let's just go ahead and pull off this intersection. And yeah, as soon as I pull off, the real cherries and berries come out and pull you over. Okay, what was the stop for? What are you doing out here? I don't think that's any of your business. What's the reason you're stopping me right now? Where are you heading? Well, I'm going that way, and I'm coming from this direction. And they didn't get my ID that night. They ran the tag on the truck, but yeah, they quickly realized that I wasn't the person they were stopping or looking for at that point.
So you think those stops only work for people that are going to give up their rights?
Oh yeah, hands down. Which is what they're looking for, which goes right on back to, this training. How can we subvert their constitutional rights? If you know what they are, well, and you and I discussed, our rights only exist where we're willing to enforce them and able to enforce them.
Right.
And if we're not able to do that, then our rights are as good as non-existent. Best way is if they don't have any clue what their rights are, you can run over them. And the law enforcement have been held up by the Supreme Court to be able to lie to suspects. And so yeah, you can tell them whatever you want to get them to confess. You can tell them all the evidence that you don't have against them to get them to confess to a lesser crime, which is actually what you were going after them for in the first place.
And is there any point in there where they're actually required to tell you the truth?
Under oath?
That's it. Only under oath. Only if they're swearing to something.
Yep.
So then the question to ask, if an officer is giving you details about a crime that you supposed to committed, you're supposed to ask the officer, are you going to swear an affidavit to that?
I believe the best answer is what? The Pop Brothers out in California, STFU, shut the fuck up. Don't talk to cops.
Right.
That would be.
Talk. Well, we've seen all kinds of examples out there of reasons not to talk because you may not even have anything to do with the thing that they're messing with, but then you say something that triggers a whole different line of questioning. The next thing you know, you're in cuffs and in jail for something that you didn't even have an idea that was going to happen.
Well, and far too many times they go fishing for information, and they may have absolutely nothing to begin with, but you provide just enough, even if it's not accurate information, even if you don't realize you're giving information, you give them just enough that they're able to conjugate in their mind that they have something, and you might beat the charge, but you'll never beat the ride.
Right. Well, and that's you'll do the time.
Yeah.
No matter what. Let's see. Damn. You got to tell me about the three girls. Kayla from Larned.
Oh. Well, so we were talking about the academy, and obviously everybody is going to be a fine, upstanding officer. I mean, we swear to this law enforcement code of ethics on the very first day. And so yes, in my class there were three women in my class, and I know one. I don't know any of their names, except for the one I gave you, and I don't even know her last name. I know the agencies they worked with. One was out of Topeka, one was out of Larned. I can't remember where the third one was. But we had the infidelity issue, which I won't even go into that because I'm not too sure about it. But two of the individuals that were at the academy, a man and a woman, ended up hooking up and got engaged. Didn't have any money for an engagement ring, and lo and behold, her roommate's cash ends up missing at the same day that she ends up with a wedding ring. And so here we are at the 188.
You're in law enforcement training.
Learning to become law enforcement officers while Reno County PD has got a full-on theft investigation going on of our class, and some of the officers with it.
Did they ever figure out?
For all I know, they had write-ups like this put in their file, like I did for not wearing my name tag.
That said,
only theirs said for theft.
That said,
I mean, because obviously, being a Class F, incident, that's pretty serious.
Well, you got wrote up for chewing.
I did, and for not wearing my KLETC approved name tag.
Well, you know,
Because I mean, the one that the people issue isn't good enough. You also have to have the plastic one.
well, I think you're just a resistor on that
That's
one.
probably what it was. Asshole for life.
Well, you know, we've had officers around here doing a lot of spitting lately.
Yeah.
Were you spitting?
Nope. Nope. I've been swallowing since day one. Where do you go from there?
Back to Werner von Braun? No. And I don't know. I tell you, we're not getting a whole lot of viewership right now. We've got 18 people.
Well, if there's any questions, I mean, we can jump in and.
Yeah, if you guys got any questions, those few of you that are there, put them in the chat. We'll get them shouted out. But
The biggest thing I want to stress to people is that having been a law enforcement officer, I want the people to understand that law enforcement officers are just like us in the sense that most of the time they're doing something for the first time with little to no experience, education, or understanding on what they're doing themselves. So any apprehension that you yourself would feel being in an unknown situation, doing some task or process for the first time, not being sure of yourself, you got to understand that's where law enforcement is quite a bit of the time. So there's kind of an unwarranted or unjustified fear when you see a badge coming towards you, because a lot of us have been taught and brainwashed growing up that these are the best of the best, the elite. They're not. They're just a scared little child.
you know, you bring that up though. You bring up that apprehension, and in a presentation that they made at a local police officer, and there was a lawyer from down south. I want to say it was somewhere around the 8th Center. That they came up and they did a presentation. And they talked about how to behave if you get stopped by the police. And one of the problems that I had with that presentation was it seemed to make it the citizen's right, or the citizen's responsibility, to dispel all that officer's fear.
And so this comes back to the libertarian side of me, and this is one of the things that you and I disagree on, because, well, you think there's a need for the officers. I, on the other hand,
Well, I
think
didn't.
you should never call an armed gunman to resolve any situation.
I think when you say that I think there's a need for the officers, I think that's a little strong of my opinion. But go ahead.
So going forth from there, I mean, you know, I passed a road pirate in the course of his duties today on my way over here to do this interview, and I had been passed lawfully on the road by a gentleman who, in my opinion, wasn't me. I was the only person around at danger. My property wasn't in danger. The officer went ahead and did a U-turn behind me, got his emergency lights on, came up behind me, turned on his emergency lights, which, even though I've been there several times, I mean, there's still a level of apprehension when you see that in your rearview mirror. Of course, mine was for other things. I was fumbling for the GoPro and trying to get everything set up inside because I thought he was coming after me. Just to get pulled over, the officer zooms by me, another vehicle that had turned onto the roadway in front of me, ended up passing that vehicle and an oncoming vehicle, straddling the center line of the road, then gets behind the initial vehicle, creates a traffic stop on the side of the road. So when you say the training is to put down his fears, the officer's fears, I have to say, who's creating the true emergency situation there? Somebody that had not created a victim, that was not putting lives at risk in any way, shape, or form, now stopped on the side of a relatively busy state highway, and you know, not going with the flow of traffic. A person who is way overpaid for their skill set is now putting their life at risk, walking in said traffic. They would once again try to cite one of us for doing the very same thing. Oh, we got to keep you safe, but yet they're going to get their state-sponsored self out there and risk their life, and all for what? I mean, what it boils down to is they're collecting revenue for their local municipality, county, or agency. Mm-hmm. And so, I guess I think that it should be 100% on the state to prove, including if they feel you're a threat, they should have to prove that. Otherwise, give us the benefit of the doubt. I think that's the way the Constitution was written. How else do you interpret innocent until proven guilty?
Well, it's not that way anymore.
Well, I know it's not. pretend like the Constitution is a real thing and still exists.
Well, you talk about drivers creating road hazards. You were telling me a story the other night about an officer that just shouldn't be a cop based on the number of cars he wrecked.
Oh yeah, but he always gets his man, and that's what the agency cares about. 6 patrol cars down, but somebody went to jail each and every time. You know, was that $100,000 in taxpayer funds? But the guy who wrecked him wasn't the one held responsible, but the guilty party was apprehended each time. Go government.
So, Dave Leeds here asked about the driver's license and travel, and we hear it a lot. This is the idea that the driver's license is only for if you're
Commercial?
participating in commercial activities.
I've heard that. I've looked into it a little bit.
You know, I had a friend that went down that road once, and that's just not a fight I'm willing to take on.
It's not one I'm willing to take on. I mean, we discussed you have to know what battles to take and what sword, you know, you're willing to fall on. I think there was a time and a place in history, if you go back and look at the records, that was the case, but there's enough people that have cognitively signed on to, you can't get behind that wheel unless you have this special card in your wallet, that I don't think, even if it's not constitutional, I don't think we'll ever get back to the time when you had the freedom to quote unquote travel without permission. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah, no, I get that, because it's more of a, well, like one of our school board members recently said, we're gonna unravel democracy if we don't uphold our traditions.
There you go. Yeah. And we don't want to unravel tyrannies. Yeah, that's not it. No, I think we're there, and I think we're there with a lot of things in this country. You and I were talking about the good old days, and the good old days just don't exist. A lot of it's a mindset. We could easily go back to the way things were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, if we had snapped fingers and changed everybody's mindset. Law enforcement is a very small percentage of this world. The leaders are an even smaller percentage of that. What you've got to get people on board with is changing their perceptions, the core beliefs they have. And I think as a society, we've evolved away from individual freedoms so much that, well, it's just an uphill battle. We'll never be able to win. I mean, we'll be lucky to hang on to what we have, but I don't think the world will ever truly be a freer place than what it was when we were younger.
So you think people are giving up freedom for security?
Oh yeah.
And I think there's not been much ambiguity about what the founding fathers said about that.
They were pretty clear, I think. As much as you want to try to muddy the waters and say, well, it depends on what your definition of his is.
Well, Benjamin Franklin said you deserve neither if you're willing to trade.
Yep. The chains of oppression lay lightly, but yeah, go forth from us.
All right, guys, we'll try to improve this a little bit as I go along if we do another live. But I want y'all to go over and visit Andrew at Questioning Their Authority. There's going to be links. There's also links in the...
And there will be some new videos up.
Yeah, he's going to go out bothering road pirates.
Yeah. Make them earn their keep.
But I'm going to do a little bit more looking into the training records and talking about training with, and it's just an interesting subject to find out the type of training that officers are receiving versus the type of training that we're told that they're receiving. You know, when we as citizens look at something called constitutional, training on constitutional law, you don't see it as training on how to get around the Constitution. We think it's training on how to abide the Constitution. Those are things we need to question. I'm going to let that play out. I don't think this is great.
Do what?
Oh, this is going to go that great.
What do we need to do?
I don't know.